They mailed me a $50,000 fine and figured that would close the chapter like slapping a sticker on a mess and walking away. I remember holding that envelope against the fridge, the red HOA logo glaring up at me, and thinking, 50,000 for trying to keep my family's house from becoming a boat? That's the moment everything that had been small and stubborn in this valley decided to get loud. My name's Eli Mercer. I grew up in a place where the creek mattered not in the Instagram way, but as something that fed the fields, cleared the heat, and once a decade got ornery enough to wash porches out from under chairs. After a flood ruined my sister's nursery when she was pregnant with her first, I took my savings and the handful of nights I had left that weren't clouded by work and built a little dam at the top of our hollow. It wasn't fancy, it was gravel and concrete, and a sluice I could open if the rain came hard. I did the paperwork, filed the permits, talked to the county engineer Ben Ramsey who came out, tapped the earth with his boot, and gave me his nod. I thought that would be the end of it. It turned out it was just the beginning. At first, it was small things, a neighbor who didn't wave anymore, a passive note about aesthetics slid under my door. Then came the formal letter, the 50,000 figure typed like an accusation. The HOA president Marla Finch read the rules like scripture and liked quoting the parts nobody else cared to memorize. She called it an unauthorized structure. To her, a sluice and a few boulders were a violation of the community's visual harmony. To me, it was insurance against losing Aunt June's house to mud. The two views did not agree. We met at the community center with folding chairs and two bright lights. I sat there, palms a little damp, while Marla tapped the microphone, the clip-on echo making her voice sound like a bell. "We have standards," she said. "We enforce them." She smiled at the room like someone offering candy, except her candy was compliance. The crowd was split, some folks cross-armed, some watching the drama like it was a weather report. "So what do you want me to do?" I asked, because I was tired of dancing around it. Tear it down and let the houses flood next season? Marla's face went cold in a way that's personal, like there was a ledger and I'd signed the wrong line. "We want the structure brought into compliance or removed," she said. "Fines will stand until it is corrected." There's a peculiar thing that happens when authority decides you're a problem. The small noises multiply. Someone started doing nightly patrols, circling with flashlights and clipboards as if the dam were a stray dog that needed paperwork. Carol on the compliance committee took to photographing every angle, pin staccato clicking like a metronome. I learned to savor garlic at dinner and count the headlights in the dark. But I have friends. Tommy Cruz is the kind of neighbor who eats sunflower seeds on the porch and will show up at 7 with a bucket and a grin if you need help. When the patrol started, Tommy and a handful of others began leaving empty lawn chairs by my driveway, a quiet, human fence. "You didn't build that thing to spite anyone," Tommy said the day we leaned on the hood of his truck and watched rain roll over the ridge. "You built it 'cause it kept the water off our basements." That should be the end of the story. It wasn't. The end of that story, it turned out, was a setup. I could have paid the fine and walked away. I could have taken a sledgehammer to the sluice and watched months of careful work vanish down the creek. But something in me, maybe the same stubbornness that put rocks in place on cold mornings, decided to play the long game. I hired a lawyer, June Alvarez, who smelled of tobacco and sharp conviction, and when she read the county's file, she smiled a little, but not the pleased kind, the concerned kind. "They don't have the authority to demand removal when permits are in order," she said. "But they do have the ability to make life miserable until someone makes a mistake." And that's what happened. Marla wanted the visible victory, the picture in her newsletter, the applause. She wanted the dam gone because it was tangible proof she could make the rules mean something. So the HOA voted to petition for removal, citing community standards and public safety concerns like incense. The day the demolition crew showed up, the hollow smelled like rain, even though the sky was clear. I stood on my porch and watched as machines bright and obedient tore the edges of what I'd built. People came, some curious, some with their phones up like they were already editing the headline. I remember the first crack, a clean, dull snap like a bone under a boot. Someone in the crowd cheered. Marla clapped, her hands slow, triumphant. We had a plan, June and I and Ben from the county. We filed. We preserved. We let them have the satisfaction of thinking the problem was solved. The tricky part about patience is that it looks like surrender until it isn't. I watched them dismantle the dam, and I let them. And when the sluice was finally gone and the concrete was scraped away, when the crowd hooped and scattered back to their lawns, the sky opened. It was the sort of storm movie director's dream of sudden, furious, merciless. Water that had been held back for a week came roving down the hillside like an animal set free. Without the dam, without a buffer, the flow carved a new path, and Alan's basement, Alan, who lived 2 houses down and had never been much for meetings, became a swimming pool. Mailboxes floated. The road by the community center buckled like a carpet. People's faces change in floods. There's a look that's the opposite of smug, urgent, raw, searching. Marla's smile dissolved into something tight and small. She tried to say, "We did what the rules required," but words in that moment sounded like bandages on a broken ankle, insufficient. We spent that night sandbagging and shouting and lending each other towels, and on the porch where the brokerage of power had been, neighbors who'd waved at each other thinly now touched hands and exchanged real apologies. The HOA's enforcement cheer had turned into a ledger of costs, insurance claims, emergency repairs, and a few quiet, terrible apologies that someone put in the wrong tone. Legal things slid into motion. Alan's insurance called the county. June filed a suit. The county inspector, Ben, who had come out originally to approve the dam, stood in the rain with his clipboard and an expression that said he hadn't expected to be part of anyone's theatrical downfall. There was a permit, he said simply, and there was a decision to remove something that provided mitigation. It's complicated. Complicated is code for consequences. The HOA board found themselves under scrutiny, then litigation, then the kind of investigative attention that removes titles and replaces them with questions. It turned out some of the sternness had been personal. Marla's father had lost a property to flood decades ago, and she had, in her grief, turned tidy rules into a way to make sure she was never vulnerable again. That doesn't excuse making your neighbors pay, but it explains the shape of the anger. Then there was the petty sabotage. Someone we later learned, Marla's nephew, was caught trying to tamper with county equipment meant to rebuild a proper, approved flood control structure. He was arrested in front of the post office, cuffed and read, still trying to argue that he'd only done what needed doing. Seeing him led away was a legal punctuation mark. It made clear that the price of performative power can be criminal entanglement. The county built a proper dam, afterward engineered, permitted, and paid for with funds that, inconveniently, included contributions from the HOA members themselves once their legal bills were tallied. There's an irony in watching the people who demanded you remove something end up paying to replace it with something better. It felt like a bitter aftertaste, justice that costs more than vindication. I don't want this to read like triumph porn. I didn't dance on anyone's misfortune. Houses were damaged. Some folks lost keepsakes that can't be replaced. We all stood in the mud and felt the weight of small community failures. But one thing settled in me like sediment. Patience, not the passive kind, but the patient accumulation of facts and paperwork and quiet truth, can outlast theatrics. People still talk about Marla with a mix of scorn and pity. She moved out the next year, taking her binder of rules with her. Tommy keeps his lawn chair where it was the night of the storm, as if it's a marker. June, my lawyer, took me out for coffee once it was over and said, "You didn't win because you were stubborn. You won because you kept your head when others wanted a headline." I told her I didn't feel like winning. It felt messy and costly and human. When I walk past the engineered dam, now the clean lines, the official plaque, the county badge, I think about the little things that make up our lives. The way we listen to each other, the ways we let anger turn into action, the decisions we make when no one's watching. I think about the envelope I pinned to the fridge for a while, a reminder that paper can be threatening, but it can also be paper to tape to a wall to remember what mattered. So here's what I'd ask you, because I've learned that stories like this aren't just mine, they're everyone's. When a community chooses rules over neighbors, what should come first? When someone in power makes an example of you, what do you do? Fight back fast, or hold your place and file the right papers? If you like this, share it with someone who lives on a creek, or someone who loves a good fight about rules. And if you've got a story like this of your own, a little dam, a big fine, or a neighbor who just wouldn't stop, I want to hear it.